Hello folks, good evening. I'm making this video because it's already about 1 year later since the Ukraine conflict started by Russia. And so, even though there are people making comments about this, here's my take. Because I think that what isn't really been talked about is that there's been a lot of things in this conflict that have already been unmasked throughout the year. So I just start off that like I was so surprised that the people who are like anti-war left, who are supposedly opposing war intervention, are all of a sudden like supporting this invasion and blaming the other side or blaming NATO for this conflict, which I do agree that somehow NATO did play a role in, stirring up Russia to drive them to invade Ukraine. But what was shocking to me is that, like, the people who they're supposed to be criticizing, the pro-war people, the people who are supposed to be in the neoconservative foreign policy objective, are also supporting Russia and are also aligning themselves with this fake anti-war left in the Ukraine conflict. Like, it was so shocking to me that Tucker Carlson, who's supposed to be a U.S. pro-war, someone who's supposed to condemn Russia to um, for the invasion, is all of a sudden he's all of a sudden friends with the people he's criticizing for being a anti-U.S. interventionist perspective, and that even a libertarian-leaning person like Ron Paul, a former senator, or I think he was congressman, all of a sudden like aligns with these people that he criticizes because you know these libertarian and conservative people are supposed to be like condemning these anti-war protesters or activists for you know being blind that stop stop the U.S. from supporting a country, just like how these so-called anti-war left have, they were supporting the regime of Assad in Syria and their betrayal and them betraying the leftists in Syria. So there was a famous protest in Washington called the Rage Against the War Machine. Not to confuse with the Rage Against the Machine, the rock band. That all of a sudden, that this so-called left, and then the fascists far right are all of a sudden close buddies because they're all solidly unified against Ukraine. And they're solidly unified in Russia swallowing up Ukraine. And of course, there's sections of the left that have called these people on the so-called left as the campus left or the fake left because every time that the US supports a country, they're all of a sudden they pop out of nowhere and then they start yelling stop US intervention, but they do not say a word if it's Russia or another country that the US doesn't like, um, condemns. So that's one part that has been unmasked because it looks like that in the end of the day, these fake anti-war left and the pro-war fascist right wing have all one thing in common, is that they support invasion. But when it touched their narrative. What unmasked in this conflict also is the European and North American nations' neglection of its investment and support to the countries that are labeled as Global South or poor countries in South America, Africa, and parts of Asia. So it is no surprise, and you can understand why all of a sudden these countries in the Global South are all of a sudden aligning themselves with Russia in this conflict in Ukraine because they think that it's a European problem, it's not a world problem, because they have a problem that these European countries are supporting Ukraine are not supporting other countries who have the same similar conflicts. They also have a history of Russia supporting them when they were fighting against their former European colonial masters. And then also that these powerful countries in the global north only just wants to use these countries in the global south as their mechanism support or just as pawns. Just like example when then Prime Minister Imran Khan of Pakistan called out the hypocrisy of the West and saying that they're not going to be used as pawns or they're just only using them for support but not for anything else. And he also called out that they hadn't done enough to solve the problem in the Kashmir region, which China, Pakistan, and India are fighting. So that's one thing that's unmasked. So another part what unmasked in this conflict is the fact that Putin's evil was not done because he did it alone, even though that he has done a good job in spreading misinformation because he himself was an agent in the KGB. When his evil was thriving, the NATO-led nations allowed his evil to thrive, and they did nothing to stop it. And then, because after the end of the Cold War, after the Soviet Union fell, they um, imposed a neo-conservative foreign policy objective and a neoliberal free market economy. And that kind of system that they brought into these countries have kept these countries in the former communist countries poor and worst. So that's also what has been unmasked in this conflict over a year now. So I do support Ukraine for self-determination. I think that while it is true that these Nazis are everywhere, these fascist Nazis are even throughout Eastern Europe and even those that are being supported by Putin himself. So even they're secretly being supported by Russia, these Nazis. It's not just in the US. So I will be signing off. So this is my opinion of um, what is happening in Ukraine. And so I'll see you in my next video.